Well, good morning. Thanks
Morning.
everyone for joining us. My name's Tom Marseille. I'm one of the panelists and also serving as moderator for this session. The session is called The Business Case for Smart Building Investments. The impetus for this was a recognition that creating the ability and capability for smart building operations and outcomes, I like to say outcomes, requires an investment in hardware, software, workforce skill development, and potentially there's new businesses and relationships that have to be created between owners and occupants or tenants, and potentially utilities and likely some smart building service providers. So like any other commitment of capital, these investments have to make business sense. Traditional methods for simply valuing, say, energy cost reductions by implementing robust energy management, this is kind of an early smart building tech trend, if you will, but it does not fully capture all the identified value systems, streams commonly associated with smart buildings. So given that, it was thought that having a session that focuses on this topic that includes some owners, in this case, commercial developers owners, would be valuable. So our format, as have been other sessions, if you've attended some, and I hope you have, there were some great ones yesterday, but our format is going to be essentially not PowerPoint slides, though we are going to use one to sort of drive a conversation, and you'll see why in a minute, but it's going to be largely conversational. And so I may ask some questions, I probably will ask some questions, but from our dynamics as a group, I think it's going to mostly be keying off this survey I'm going to be showing in a few minutes, and I'll describe at that time, and having conversation around that and some of the questions that naturally come from that. Note, we do have Stan Price hiding in the background, and he's going to be monitoring the Q&A and the chat capabilities within Zoom. And he may interject with his disembodied voice with some questions that are posted by our audience when it segues well with our discussion, or perhaps if he thinks it's going to stump one of us particularly and he likes the question. So we'll see what happens there. So with that, I'd like to ask panelists to briefly introduce themselves and give their affiliation. And I'm going to go sort of alphabetical on last names. So Luis, and then Cody, and then Scott. Could you please do your introductions?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Luis Adon with Unico. And my background here in the Seattle area started in 2007. Previous to that, I was in Southern California and started working with Schnitzer West. Developed 1988, and then moved on to Urban Visions, Vulcan, and finally Unico. Very, very involved in a lot of commercial office development. Did have a multifamily West Edge Tower in when I was at Urban Visions, but largely office commercial.
Hi, my name's Cody Crawford. I'm the Director of Facility and Operations for Vulcan, Inc. I've been in the industry for 15, 20 years now. I have a degree in facilities management and technology studies. I've been with Vulcan for probably 12, 13 years, managing a diverse set of portfolios: theaters, museums, life science, Class A office, just a fraternity. It's pretty wild, yeah. But it's been fun, and we have a big focus on sustainability.
Thanks, Cody.
And I'm Scott Pape. I'm with Long Building Technologies, and I've been in the HVAC industry in one form or another for nearly 30 years, dating myself a little bit, starting out in the Navy, got my engineering degree, mechanical engineering degree, and then have since kind of worked through a variety of roles in our industry, starting from a technician all the way to the leadership position I'm in right now.
Thanks, Scott.
Yep.
And just a little bit more on me. So I'm a principal at Cezanne Group, headquartered here in Seattle. And if people might know me, my career is focused on helping clients achieve high performance outcomes in their buildings. As a mechanical engineer, by definition, that means I'm focused on energy efficiency and now more directly helping support decarbonization in buildings, as well as providing a healthy and productive indoor environment. So I'm about the indoor environment and I'm about energy. As capabilities of smart tech building tech seem to appear more and more able to support these objectives, I've gotten more and more interested. And some may have heard me use this term, but I like to say what we need are more occupant-aware buildings for building-aware occupants. And so that's one of my taglines. So with that, we're going to switch into, I'm actually going to share my screen. I'm going to share part of my screen here. Let me make sure I do it the right way and talk a little bit. As we were planning this session, let me make sure here. There, that should do it. Please tell me if you see something. Does that work? Okay, great. So as we were planning this session, I think it was Luis maybe had the great ideas like, well, we have, as you heard in the introductions, we have a couple of owner developers here, and we have someone who actually provides some of the tech, and then we have this engineer me. But it'd really be good to get a better sense of the different people out there and what their opinions are about some of this stuff and why we're seeing some of these issues, I guess, we're sort of underperforming in terms of smart buildings, in terms of why it's not happening more right now relative to the capabilities that seem to be more and more available. So was that right, Luis? You had the idea to put the survey out together?
Yeah. I broached this with Stan, and he thought it was a great idea. I kind of duped him into it, and here we are.
Yeah. So we went out, and this was not statistically a relevant one, but we collectively, the folks that were helping plan this session, reached out to people we knew in the industry. And I think we ended up getting a pretty good response rate back. We got 29 people responding to this survey of questions. And one of the prerequisites was we wanted to make them very short, easy to answer questions, and they could answer them all in 7 minutes or something like that. And we're not going to go through all the answers, but a few of them I think helped drive the discussion. So we went out to, we had commercial and institutional multifamily owners and managers was kind of the rules for who we wanted to go out to. And then, the different types of development from ground up and value add. And then the majority of people that answered the survey for us were long-term holders, but there were some short-term holders as well in the portfolio in terms of their portfolios. And then this is both build-to-suit type development activities and speculative development in terms of the respondents. And then we're going to talk about brokers as part of our discussion, but in terms of the types of brokers that are sort of finding tenants for these developers, we had, I don't actually remember if they were actually people within the survey, but we're going to talk about both third-party and in-house brokers. So we did this, and then I'm going to sort of make a comment here on this, that we sort of recognize, I sort of said this, that it is underperforming relative to its market potentials in terms of smart buildings. And so, one of the questions we wanted to get out there was, is this an accurate statement? And do we need as much smart? And so I have a polling question, because before I show you this answer, so to speak, I want to ask the audience, because we only had 29 people, and this is where I'm going to ask the poll to come up. And the question is going to be, do you think the deployment of smart building technology and practices is underperforming relative to its market potential? Now, is something coming up? Because I can't see it.
I don't see anything, Tom.
Oh, wait a minute.
There it is.
All right. So if people could just take a minute, and hopefully everyone in the audience can see this, to kind of build a consensus, and this is not just owners and developers I know we have in the audience, but I think everyone might be able to lean in on this question. Again,
Yes,
do you think
Tom, we on the panel shouldn't be giving an opinion, because we don't want to sway the
You're right. You're right. I'll stop talking. We're not going to show you how people are voting until we've given everyone a chance to click a button. So thank you, Luis. So I'll just give it a couple more seconds here. Okay, can you please close the poll and show me the answer?
Hey.
Okay, we think, basically no one thinks we're really capturing this the way we can, this potential the way we can. So that is probably not a surprise. I think I have the power to close this, so I'm going to close it. Okay. And are we able to see the screen again?
Yes, we are.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the next slide, if I can do this right. And I'm going to, basically what we did is, okay, at what level, the question was, at what level in the organization are development decisions made? Because really, if you're going to make an investment in smart building solutions, there has to be somebody who can make the call to do that. And so this was the answer. I'm going to let Luis start the conversation about this.
Thank you, Tom. As you can see from the slide, it's quite a smattering of responses here, a wide range. Obviously more at the senior level or leadership level in the organization. So there's really no one answer to this. But generally, my experience is that whoever controls the budget is generally the person that you need to talk to. That can be anywhere from the development manager on a project to the property manager on an asset, or like in Cody's case, who's the director for several assets or a larger portfolio where he has the ability to control the budget. It also speaks to your need to be able to convince or communicate to your leasing team the value of smart building solutions so that they can communicate that to the leasing broker or the tenants broker, and in turn the tenants broker can communicate that to the tenants themselves. So it's sort of a wide range, but generally from my experience, it really is who controls the budget. Now, if you're talking about a portfolio-wide approach, you really do need to get to the senior leadership, the executive level. And that, in that sense, you probably need to tie it to an organizational goal, right? Such as in sustainability, it's easy now for, a lot of organizations are tying their initiatives to, carbon neutral, to certain targets for reaching maybe 2030 goals, such as that, but tying it to that. So kind of understanding what it is the organization wants to achieve in terms of smart buildings, technology, reaching the senior leadership and convincing them that this is a goal that you want to achieve as an organization.
Yeah, I could see that. And I know we've had this conversations before. I know that you've been a champion of this, Luis. And so you really recognize that there's that educational component to getting these decision makers to think outside of where they normally thought. And, sustainability, we're going to talk more about that. But, that started to show up, and, people like Vulcan were sort of championing it early 2000, or no, yeah, about early 2000s, I would say probably. Right. But it took a long time for the larger community to get on board, I think. And I think, maybe we're sort of seeing this sort of same cycle with smart buildings as one of the factors. I don't know. Does anyone else want to weigh in on this particular point before we?
Specific to where the development decisions are made. Yeah, it really, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to the owner, right? A lot of in certain levels of leadership within an organization are given some control, but at the end of the day, we have to justify, where the value is in these types of systems, right? Whether it's going to reduce your energy costs or whether it's going to create a better work environment for, whoever the occupier is going to be, whether it's an owner occupied or a tenant occupied. Mm-hmm. So it really does come down to, in my opinion, in Luis, you can step into it, your former company being Vulcan, right? We can always propose and we can kind of lead that effort, but we need to get buy-in from our executive leadership.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. At the end of the day, you've got to translate the value to a dollar number. Yeah. And that dollar number has to work within the what the organization is looking to get in terms of return on the investment.
Yeah. Scott, long as the systems integrator, what does this tell you anything about how you're going to be successful bringing forward product offerings?
Well, yeah, we often use the analogy of like pushing a boulder up a hill, and that's from our kind of level in the value chain. We also believe that our fundamental purpose in this regard is to educate the market, is to educate the developers, educate the management companies, educate the engineers so that they all understand what the value propositions are of some of these smart building technologies, because they're not readily apparent, right? It's not a water fountain in front of the building. It's not floor to ceiling glass.
Exactly.
It's not something that a tenant can necessarily touch and maybe not even necessarily feel, right? But there's a tremendous amount of value there. And I'm sure we'll get into that discussion a little bit later, but that is the I think the challenge set before all of us.
Yeah. So I'm going to keep this conversation a little bit towards you here by going to here's one of the survey questions. So you'll notice this says question 8, and some of the other questions were incorporated in the last 2 slides. But so this question we asked was, please rate the degree of difficulty that legacy systems in buildings present in making investment decisions in smart building solutions. So legacy systems in this case might be building automation systems, things like that, security systems, siloed systems essentially. And so we asked this question of our group of 29 survey respondents, and they dutifully came back. All 29 of them came back, and it sort of was mixed. But most people thought that it was more of an impediment. The numbers were higher, or responses were higher on this end of the spectrum, where it was more of an impediment than not a problem. And so I could talk about this at length, but I'm going to again let Scott comment on this, since this falls squarely in his world and the world he experiences very frequently, I'm sure. So,
yeah, thank you. It's a really interesting question. It is a challenge that as a system integrator and my peers, we run into every single day. We're going into an existing building that in theory is largely occupied and has existing technology that for the most part is operating. And so in order to leverage some of these smart building technologies, and I use the word smart in air quotes because I think one of the challenges we face as an industry is the word smart has been so overused throughout the years, and smart doesn't really mean smart anymore. I think it kind of means it doesn't really work most of the time.
Yeah, I've been trying to find another terminology to use, and no one can come up with anything but that. So yeah. Building intelligence or something along those lines. I don't know, but yeah.
The legacy systems present a tremendous challenge in the deployment of these new technologies that are available.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of legacy systems don't have the inherent data gathering capabilities that are necessary, or the speed or the bandwidth or the security to enable these more advanced technologies, such as like fault detection or energy information systems, to where you can gather the data to create enough actionable insights to really do the work as a facilities person that's going to yield the greatest impact, yield the greatest result for your occupants, whether it's utility costs or comfort or safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so even if you build the requisite gateways and things like that to be able to communicate, which of course that was the big issue in the past, or still is an issue today. So you can speak to different legacy systems, which may or may not be doable. It still doesn't necessarily get you there.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got a lot of customers that have the latest technology in the industry, but there wasn't the forethought on the part of, or we failed as an industry to really educate our customers about the necessity of segregating networks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we work in some financial institutions and high security environments where, or there's just sensitive information, and we're on the same network as the business operations side. And so we're really beginning to talk to our customers about the importance of segregating those networks and putting in what we call OT networks, operational technology networks, which is kind of becoming, Tom's nodding his head, right? That's kind of the new thing in the industry is to begin separating those networks. And again, these legacy systems that are installed, a lot of times they share the same backbone that's already in place. And so that's yet another challenge is to separate those networks.
Mm-hmm.
So Cody and Scott, started working at Unico in 2020 during the COVID era. Unico has a large portfolio. They've probably got over 100 buildings. One of the things that in discussing this with the engineers or the chief engineers over there, each of the buildings and the systems have sort of a life cycle, right? So we talk about the opportunity of introducing these concepts when the cycle comes up for replacing specific systems, which I think is a logical place for introducing that. But you have to start the conversation fairly early so that they get used to it. There's a lot of planning that goes into making that change. So I would look at that as an opportunity, especially for large portfolios, and Cody can speak to that a little bit better probably. But yeah, that would be an opportunity. The other thing that I'm thinking about is, and I started working with ATS on a solution that did not require integration or large integration of different systems, but looking at sort of disparate standalone smart solutions that address specific uses that didn't require having to be integrated into a legacy system. So that was sort of a way of introducing the concept of smart buildings, but on a limited scale, not a wide-ranging scale, such as what you're talking about, Scott.
So sort of seeking a specific outcome that you can do with sort of a subset of the, sort of the full suite of a fully integrated platform.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense to me, sort of as sort of a beachhead, if you will, into this thing.
And I think that's one of the other challenges, Luis, that you bring up is what is the life cycle of these systems?
Good point. Yep.
Right. And
Yeah.
the life cycle of the system itself will often outlast by, a magnitude of 10, order of 10, the life cycle of the technology that's inherent in those systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
The technology is advancing far more rapidly than the hardware is. In other words, the hardware is good for 20 years, but the technology may only be good for 2 or 3.
Right.
And that's one of the challenges is we go into these existing buildings, right? I'm sure you have some in your portfolio that they have a system that works, that's defunct. And I think owners and investment decisions are being made around the idea is, okay, is there a way for me to level up the system reliably and maintain or enhance the current functionality I have? Or is it just a wholesale rip and replace investment? And those are the conversations that need to happen. I'm sure Tom has those kinds of conversations all the time because they have to be approached from the standpoint of a trusted advisor.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things I think when looking at and evaluating system integrators is what is their approach to that? Like, are they able to talk to legacy systems? Do they specialize in one product, and that's where they're gonna push you? Yeah.
It's, we're sort of talking to how do we get this to work and, what's sort of the approach to doing it. And I'm not going to go a lot further down that right now. I don't think we should. I think we want to start to get to recognizing this puts the owners at kind of a quandary as they're trying to figure out what's the value to this? What's the cost to this? Should I make this choice? And I think that's a good time to sort of like keep moving down the list on this survey, but just keeping those things in one's head. So I'm going to go to the next survey question. And this actually gets to something you just said, Luis, about sort of a limited smart building solution, if you will. And so when CapEx is a factor, and so this was interesting. So we're not experienced at creating surveys. So let me just say, this was a question. When CapEx is a factor, do you consider non-integrated and limited smart building solutions? And so we kind of got, people answering questions quickly, and maybe not surprisingly, when you say, well, yeah, we consider that, sometimes we would consider that. And so we're not sure how valuable this was the way we asked the question, but we again trying to make it fairly easy for people. But I guess sort of this idea about, capital allocations for SNART have not been made, where do we go? And I'd like to see if, Cody would like to sort of start into this discussion as the other owner, but the owner actually has to maintain facilities in the room.
Yeah, for sure. So Yeah, I mean, that conversation, there was a couple things that I wanted to comment on the previous question, but associated.
Feel free. I didn't mean to cut that off.
That's all right. So going back, so the big question was that network separation. That's always been an issue.
Mhm.
But I think that with the capabilities of these smart systems and all the integrations, whether it's your space planning or your reservation systems, or you're trying to count occupants, those are very tenant or occupant specific systems that they might not want on the building network. But if they're sharing, a sensory device like an occupancy sensor, things like that, you almost have to have that integration somehow. So even though there will be a separation of networks, you still have to somehow be able to communicate between the two to get a fully integrated smart system. And I think that, for facilities professionals, that's part of that overwhelmingness of being, sold by all these different parties. You got your smart building solutions, you got your building automation systems, you got your conference room booking and scheduling and all that. And everybody's coming at you like, hey, we can integrate, we can do this and this, but you really can't do that, without having a really clear network infrastructure in place or strategy in place.
Yep.
Absolutely.
So anyway, back to when CapEx is a factor, right? Again, it depends on, I feel like most people do their due diligence to get the most amount of life in any CapEx investment. So I think Luis or somebody mentioned the cycle before. I think Luis, you were talking to your engineers, talking about the cycle, right?
Yeah,
you want to maximize the cycle of that investment. If it's a rip and replace, I think it's, for facilities managers or facilities who are responsible for these systems and I suppose getting approval from executive management. If it's a rip and replace, I think it's a little easier because you have the ability to, future-proof your building a bit, right? So you want to look to the future, but if CapEx is a factor, and I read that as you don't have, a big bucket of money to spend, do you consider non-integrated limited building solutions? I think people that are, have tight budgets are going to do what they think is best for their building to keep it operating and keep that work environment as comfortable as possible. So yeah, I think that some organizations, are just kind of nailed to what they have, and they don't have the ability to really look for that next future-proofed product.
Yeah, one of the things I'd like to interject here, Cody, you bring up a great point about, limited budgets and those kinds of things, and looking at what are the alternatives to maybe a full-blown, fully integrated smart building solution, right? To integrate and have all those separate systems. To me, when I'm reading this slide, the point that I think comes out for me is some information, some data, some automation, some capability to extrapolate data and information and interaction out of the system onto a phone or whatever. In our homes now these days, the amount of automation that is available to us with Alexa and lighting and our Nest thermostats and those kinds of things is unbelievable. And then to walk into a commercial building that's got pneumatic controls in it, even if you can't afford a full-blown, building automation system, even the minimal amount of data can be overlaid. And I think this is kind of what Luis was alluding to earlier. I'd like to, hear from him about, other options to full-blown systems, but there's a lot of piecemeal, if you will, opportunities that I think get you 80% of the way there to really get capturing a lot of the benefit.
Yeah, let me respond to Cody's point here earlier from a development point of view, because Cody deals with existing facilities. I'm more in the developing new facilities. And so when I'm looking at a budget and I'm looking at, and usually when I talk to the investment managers or the leasing people, they're always asking me, what does that mean in terms of increasing my rent by 50 cents, right? What does that mean? Because it's a big deal. If you're 50 cents over your competition, you may lose your deal, right? So generally, and I just spoke with a friend who's an investment manager, and he said it's roughly in a 200,000 square foot building, probably somewhere between $1 to $2 million in terms of added investment or added cost over your standard building, in order to achieve the value, but it'll cost you roughly 50 cents, depending on the return that you're looking for. So if you're looking at what that investment might be for, being, where your leasing people are willing to go to 50 cents and seeing value in it, you're looking at a $1 to $2 million investment. That's on a new construction, 200,000 square foot building. That obviously fluctuates depending on the size of the building that you're dealing with. To Scott's point here, when I was, Lucy Gidney with ATS and I had discussions, when she introduced to me a few standalone systems. And so what I decided to do was create a matrix of solutions and products and use cases that I could introduce to the property managers and say, here's a matrix of use cases or uses with solutions for them that you can look into to see if there's value that you can introduce to tenants or to your own property managers. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now. And that's got me the idea of looking at more, focused standalone systems rather than a full integrated smart building solution. So does that answer your question, Scott?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
And that makes a lot of sense. Again, it's sort of, you could go for the whole quote enchilada if you know what all the outcomes are and you can tie them all together. But when you have this legacy scenario, maybe it's like, where is the most value for whoever it's for? Is it energy management? Is it something else? What lights up that owner's, a little light bulb over their head saying, hey, I think I can sell this, or the tenants are going to like this, or whatever, or I'm going to stay competitive by doing it. So it makes sense to me to think this way. But of course, it also says that you may not be getting any closer to the fully integrated thing by doing this kind of investment. You're sort of in the same camp, right, of somewhat siloed scenarios, right, in terms of your systems.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I think that the other thing is that, at least and it's probably for new development as well, but you have your major building automation system suppliers out there that have a lot of capabilities to at least create data. And a lot of them are looking at some complementary software that can analyze data, but you get predictive analytics and some of these other things that come with it. And when you do go out and you already have something in your building that has worked for the last 20 years and they have their newest version some of these smart building systems are competing against them, and these automation companies are kind of like, well, we can do a lot of what they're saying that we can do or that they can do. Mm-hmm. And so you have to go back and forth on, okay, well, what are we focused on, just the energy side? Because if that's the case, then your standalone building automation system might be okay. But if you want to start looking at trying to integrate with some of these other systems, right, your security system or some of these things, then you start to say, okay, well, what do we need to augment just the building automation system?
Yep.
There was a chat just came up.
Yeah, somebody else is watching that for us, I think, Cody. So one of the other things, we're talking a lot about HVAC and energy. One of the other things that you had mentioned, security and access control, Cody, right? And that's one of the things, we've got getting away from keys or near field type technologies, card key access, to frictionless access with, again, our smart devices. And one of the challenges, again, these systems are expensive, right? So that's a CapEx decision. And how do I translate that wow factor for a tenant experience into 50 cents a rent?
Yeah.
I don't know how to make that argument. I think
that's
you know, as a system integrator, I know how to do it. I don't know how to make the argument really well. It's in a compelling way.
It's the question that needs to be answered, the connection that needs to be made. That's probably the answer we're looking for to this whole discussion that's going to make this thing happen more and more widespread, become more and more widespread. So I'm going to introduce the next question because it's not exactly on that, but we're talking about sort of barriers, potential barriers to why smart buildings are not becoming more and more, or technology is not becoming more and more a factor in our industry. And this is about brokers. So we're going to take aim at them, I guess you'd say. And I'm going to show 2 slides, and then I'm going to ask some comments on them after I sort of show them. So the first, whoops, hang on here, make sure I got it there. So for an owner or developer who uses third-party brokers to find tenants, we asked the survey contestants or the survey respondents to please rate their familiarity with smart building solutions. This is how well do the brokers know what's going on? And you can see that they were not complimentary in that. There was nobody who thought they were very, very knowledgeable, which would be down on this end. And we had a weighted average of 393 in terms of the total respondents. So generally not thinking the third-party brokers are very familiar with smart building solutions, which seems on the outset, if you're going to be talking to potential tenants, you'd want to be able to have somebody who could communicate that to them if you're going to try to capture that additional 50 cents. And then I'm going to just show the answer to the other question, and then we can sort of have discussion, because we said, okay, that's third-party brokers. And then what about in-house brokers? And so I don't know if the answers were because they wanted to not insult their in-house brokers as much, or if they really are more knowledgeable. But they ended up a little bit better, mostly still on the wrong end of the scale, but under 5. So somewhat more knowledgeable if they're in-house. And maybe that's because folks like Luis are talking to them. I don't know. But I'm not, this is not my world. So I'd love to hear from Luis and maybe Cody or about this whole question.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So clearly from the results of the survey, brokers are not the most educated in terms of smart solutions. And even in my own experience at Unico, when I started to introduce the concept of smart buildings to Unico, the advice that was given to me by senior leadership was to reach out to what we call market leaders. And so Unico is in several markets. We're in Austin, Texas, Nashville, Denver, Salt Lake City, Portland, and Seattle. And so I reached out to several of the market leaders managing those areas, and none of them actually had any knowledge of smart buildings. To the local team in Seattle, they did, and actually asked me to take a look at one of the recently renovated buildings to see what we could do on a smart solutions basis to accelerate the velocity of leasing. So we're working on that. But clearly, there's a very clear understanding that brokers are not the most educated in terms of smart buildings. I sort of recognized that when I started working with Urban Visions and engaged WSP. And at the time, Tom was with WSP, which is where I first worked with him. And we embarked on delivering a solution to at least one project. It's called the Net now. But I recognized that in doing the things that we were doing in the back of house as part of the shell and core, it wasn't obvious, as Scott pointed out. It's not an obvious change or value added to the building. We needed to create what I call a roadmap that I could deliver to the leasing people and say, here's a roadmap for what you can do in the building that we're building for you, setting it up so that tenants who come in are able to implement certain smart solutions that they might be interested in. So you actually have to show them what it is that can be done, as opposed to, just delivering a building to them. So that's part of it. Big part education. You've got to educate the people that are in the loop, meaning the brokers and eventually the tenants. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've always advised people who come to me, the vendors, is we developers don't necessarily do things on our own initiative. Usually that comes from the tenants. If the tenants want it, the tenants drive it. And so that really is your target market. It's the tenants, because they drive what the value is that they're really interested in seeing.
That says for me that that a build to suit tenant that has these interests would have the highest probability. If you're going totally speculative, you're having to really weigh the whole market in making these kinds of decisions, Luis.
Well, interestingly, Scott, Tom, I reached out to the team that took over 555 and Bellevue Plaza, which are 1 million square feet each in Bellevue, Vulcan projects, and Cody's familiar with them. And I asked them about the smart building initiatives that I'd asked Stantec and GluMac to implement in their BODs. And I was told that some of the smart initiatives were value engineered out of the project because Amazon actually wasn't interested in them. And so that's, you would think Amazon is a highly, technological company would be interested in these things, but lots of surprises. In this market, Google and Facebook and Amazon, these leaders aren't necessarily implementing smart building solutions that you would think they would be.
Yeah, and I think the next question when we get to it, but I don't want to get there quite yet, will help me sort of speak to that from sort of where I sit a lot of the time, which is in the sustainable space. But I will just briefly say that, it's sort of that same arc, right now, those kind of companies are all about trying to meet goals that they have established around carbon or decarbonization, and, very interested in playing higher levels of health and productivity for the people that are going to be occupying the spaces. What's interesting to me is okay, both of those things can be very well supported by good smart building solutions. And it's they're not quite there yet. But I have a feeling once it's demonstrated well for the market, that somehow that connection is going to be made. But, we're still here having this conversation, asking why it hasn't happened. So.
Yeah, I think that it goes back to that kind of degree of separation, right? I think, Amazon's a very private company, right? They want their own data. They don't want to share the data. And at the end of the day, when you implement these smart building solutions, depending on how smart they are and what kind of data they're gathering, it's data that's going to be used to either improve or develop new products. And it's kind of okay, well, who owns that data? Amazon doesn't like to give all of that out. And it goes back to that separation networks, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, they have the building automation system, which is, brand new and should be state of the art, right? That's managing in a very energy effective manner. And then they have all of their internal tenant specific systems that they want. And I don't think they want any integration. And I know that that's kind of, and Luis and I, back in the day, we're working with our tech team, and that was a big issue for them, is having streams cross and having our data outside and having access to, integrating with, whatever it might be, whether it's your access control system or your HR system or these types of things.
Well, and that just, again, speaks to the necessity of separating the networks that we've been talking about, right? And also one of the challenges, Cody talking about some of these really high value tenants, and Luis, you guys have mentioned, is, the 330-300 rule, right? That we are probably all familiar with, and it was done by some research of, some of the peers, that may even be represented on this call, right? Research that Jones Lang LaSalle did, basically correlating savings, how do you move up the value chain, right? Of making an energy efficient investment, a sustainability investment, how does that translate into employee productivity, right? And so I'm probably butchering this horribly, Tom,
No.
but
No.
So typical, just kind of rough rule of thumb, right? $3 a square foot in energy, $30 a square foot in lease, $300 a square foot in salary. And all those things are chained together.
Right.
So if if I make a 1% improvement, down at the energy efficiency level, it translates a huge amount of leverage in productivity. And apparently that's what the research shows. So
Yeah.
communicating that.
Yep. It's always been the challenge when you sort of talk about healthy buildings as well. When we were talking about healthy buildings from the standpoint of productivity and cognitive, abilities and things like that, there's studies out there that show that. And so,
Right.
More outside air, good, and all these things. Of course, that whole discussion's taken slightly a different turn now with the pandemic and airborne transmission of viruses. So,
all right, who's got bingo? Somebody just got bingo. We were trying to see if we could go the whole session without bringing it up.
did I? Oh, I forgot. Okay, that's me.
Well, if your sick days were a metric, that's blown out of the water now.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, you essentially got it right, Scott. I mean, they're sort of orders of magnitude and just the recognition. And so, you can monetize, and we're getting a little ahead in the discussion, but that's okay. You can monetize the results of energy efficiency, energy management, I'll say, possibly, but, investments in retrofits and things like that. But we'll say from the smart building standpoint, energy management, better energy management, so you can, optimize the operation of your building and save your 30 cents, which is a 10% savings on $3, or you can reduce your sick days or improve your productivity of the occupants and completely dwarf that. And so everyone knows that. And I guess as long as we're on that topic, we'll leave it there for a second. I mean, one of the fundamental barriers there, I think, is, and this is where I'm going to ask, Luis maybe to comment on, is, you're the owners, right? You've got a certain kind of a lease arrangement with the tenants, and and you're not, and it's not your benefit, right?
Yeah, sorry, Tom.
Yeah.
I think I lost the thread there on the question. Can you repeat that?
Maybe I didn't ask it very well. Is just even energy management, is not necessarily, if you're not paying the tenant's energy bill, what's your incentive there? So it's like there's a disconnect between where the investments can be made and who gets the benefit when you have a landlord tenant relationship, right?
Yeah, no, you're perfectly right. And Cody knows this as well. When you're talking to the leasing folks, and I'm trying to push energy efficiency and conservation and all that stuff, and they say to me, well, what does that mean to me? And what does that mean to the tenant? Because it's all pass through, right? It's triple net. Right. The CAMs are paid by the tenant. So how do we communicate that? Well, I think it all goes back to education. I think a lot of the tenants don't really understand that these solutions actually benefit them, that it translates to them. And I don't think the industry has done a great job of communicating that to the tenants. Because as I said previously, a lot of what we do is driven by the tenants. And the tenants come to us and say, we want better efficiency, we want less utility costs. Then yeah, there's an incentive to employ this. But again, it comes from education of the tenants and the tenant brokers. And tenant brokers really don't know much about these things. I mean, I'm sorry. Any brokers out in the audience, my apologies. But
I did move over from that slide, but I think the final comment we would have on brokers is there needs to be better education so that they carry some of this stuff in their pockets with them. And
exactly. But if you're going to spend your education dollars, I would spend it on the real estate, the tenants' real estate people, executives that make decisions, right?
Yeah.
Because they will push it.
But Luis, so back to that, is the tenant willing to pay a premium in rent for a more efficient building? I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Not right now. See, right now, as long as you're hitting your CAM of, I'm guessing here, Cody, maybe you can tell me somewhere between $14 to $16 a square foot. As long as you're in that ballpark, they don't really think about that. It's not part of the equation. Yeah. They're thinking more in of the lease rate, right? Is it $45? Is it $50? Or $50.50, right? That's what they're thinking of. As long as you're within the ballpark of the CAM, they don't really care. So
there's this next question sort of reminds me of what I would want to say to what you just said there, Luis, is there's often a disconnect between a company's sort of higher aspirations about what they're trying to accomplish and, and the organization and what their mission is, or excuse me, what their sustainable goals are. It may not be their actual business, and the people that are making real estate decisions. And so as long, so I'm going to say Amazon, but, Amazon and some of those other tech companies, they have very aggressive goals to decarbonize. But whether that, and I'm not going to speak to them because I don't actually know, but how the timing it takes for that to sort of trickle down to sort of now these decisions that are being made when you're looking at leases and the things you're asking of owners or developers, it's like it's a bit of a disconnect sometimes. So there's sort of different sandboxes, if you will, between sort of these higher level maybe goals that you're presenting sustainability wise and smart building solutions as an example. So this was the survey question. Do you have corporate sustainability goals that could be met by smart building solutions? And, we've got 55% of people said yes, but what was surprising to, I guess, us who put the survey question together was we still had, more than 45% essentially who said either no or don't really know. And so this sort of speaks again to there might be this disconnect.
So Tom, my belief is there definitely is an intersection between sustainability and energy efficiency and smart buildings. And so I recognize that when I joined Unico, one of the first things I did was look for the sustainability team who is most focused on energy efficiency. And I realized that at Unico, sustainability, in fact, we have an internal sustainability group. And so I latched onto them. I hope they're not listening because I'm sure they don't want to hear the word latched, but I try to tie on with them because I realized they had a presence within Unico that I could kind of capitalize on. And they agreed that there was an intersection between smart building solutions and energy efficiency. So they're well aware of that. Again, it comes down to really educating the public as to how smart buildings can affect the energy solutions. We talked, I don't know if it was you, Scott, but I think it might have been Craig who brought up that, there are a lot of state of Washington initiatives, local requirements that push this discussion. And I don't think that owners are aware of or really geared towards responding to it by using smart building solutions for it. Again, it's a matter of education. I think we're all sort of behind the curve in implementing these things, but it has to happen, right?
I think from a new construction standpoint, there's a lot of things that are being driven down into the industry by fiat, right? By compliance to International Energy Code, for example, is now got some stipulations requiring a certain level of automation and intelligence in a building for energy management. I mean, that's now going to be a requirement as local municipalities adopt it. Now it's in those retrofit markets that the challenge continues, right? Translating those smart building things like frictionless access and frictionless elevator calls and where's my parking spot available and are the lights coming on in my office and can I, right, all these different things that can all be tied together. How do I translate that to lease dollars, right?
Well, I think you just sort of mentioned it right there. Is, I mean, one of the drivers, if the market doesn't figure it out, of course, is always regulatory. But it's even there's this sort of indirect thing. The regulators are probably going to focus on the energy side, and they are, as you say, with the IUC and CD Seattle, and has some requirements as well for metering and sub-metering and reporting systems and things like that. But it's a little harder to regulate smart building solutions. So unless there was a real national sort of interest or a interest in sort of some kind of an outcome they're trying to drive. But anyway, so this question, I just for me, it was kind of like, I don't understand quite why they're not connected, which is why I talk about it a lot, I guess. But I want to move on actually to the next question. Whoops. here because I'm going to have a poll question on this. And this is one of these ones where we really wanted to start dialing in, what are the outcomes people are most interested in? And so we asked this question and we said, probably we shouldn't have said, check all that apply. And I think everybody applied, everybody who answered the question said, well, well-being of occupants, great. Energy savings, great. Operational efficiency for my operations. That's good stuff too. A few people said other because we didn't give them that, and I don't know what they specified. So since we didn't,
we're not just as we're not professional pollsters. Everyone who's in the audience here.
So we're going to put a polling question up right now. It's hopefully makes this a little bit. We can find some separation here. And so the question is we're going to give you one. Pick the one you think is most important or was most interest of you as the audience. And we'll give it a few seconds here. So, is it the well-being of occupants? Is it energy savings, operational efficiency? Or I also put in there increased work efficiency. So sort of the productivity of occupants is what I was sort of getting at with that one. All right, can we see the results? All right, we got a little separation.
Interesting.
Yeah. So perhaps because of some of the things that people have been talking about during the other sessions, or perhaps because of the audience, energy savings came out ahead. And maybe that's again because it's the thing that people can most make the connection to and monetize.
Exactly.
But well-being of occupants, good. That makes a little sense to me as the second one. People don't really care about productivity, I guess. Maybe they didn't like.
Sorry, Tom.
I was trying to get at that 300. That Scott mentioned, the 330, 300 there. So, all right. So, what do we infer from this, guys?
I'm thinking that to your point, Tom, that because of the discussion on energy, and it's an easy outcome to quantify, right? There's an easy way of what people don't understand is when you're looking at it from an building owner's point of view, because it affects utilities, and utilities are a CAM that are passed on to the tenant. From a building owner's point of view, it isn't as significant. Although we all want to have buildings that are energy efficient, in terms of leasing and making decisions, it probably isn't our major thing. Going to what Scott was saying about the 330-300 rule, when I think about the 330-300 rule, if I'm gonna invest $1, I think I'd like to invest $1 in the 300 range, where I'm impacting salaries and payroll. And that usually is related to well-being of your occupants and increased work efficiency. So those are the two that I think, if I was going to apply $1, that's where I would put it. So anyway, that's just me. So
Mm-hmm.
How about you guys?
Yeah, where in a smart building solution would have the most bang against the well-being of occupants? Where do you see that?
Well,
are you asking? I mean, I
guess
go ahead, Tom.
Well, there's sort of two things to think about there. Well-being can mean, are we providing conveniences to them, the things that make their overall experience better in coming to visit, say, a building they don't know, or coming to visit the building in their space, and that could be all kinds of things. Just a building recognizes when you show up, easier authentication when you come in. You come to a space, then the space, this is your space, or a space that has where preferences that you may have for that space are going to be there for you when you get there, and so it's more comfortable and all those kinds of things. So there's sort of this enhanced experience, or maybe you can order lunch easier because you got some app for your building that allows you to get it delivered to your door. I don't know. You can go on about those things. So there's sort of these conveniences and things that maybe make, life a little easier for you that way, or reserving conference rooms, so on. Then there's the health, aspect. And for me, the healthy aspect is about, that translates to either less work, sick days, or higher productivity, better cognition when you're in meetings, things like that. And that starts to speak to the indoor environment, specifically what we're doing to the indoor environment and trying to provide, higher levels of better air quality, so to speak, which of course then gets into the whole, well, what does that mean? And how do you measure that? And how do you provide that? And interestingly, yesterday, they really got into the meat of that discussion on a session on that. And, I've been saying for a while that, we have proxies for air quality that are fairly easy for us to get, like CO2 is a proxy, because that sort of speaks to how much fresh air you've got. And these guys were kind of blowing it away and saying, yeah, there's a lot of stuff you have to look at if you're talking about, again, the real baddies of the air, which I'm not going to mention, that we're now concerned about. So well-being has multiple facets to it. I tend to think first as a mechanical engineer, again, about providing the most comfortable environment and the healthiest environment as I can through, the best air quality that you can provide in the right temperatures and not creating any impediments to the work.
In the most energy efficient manner.
Which of course, that's where you start to get into it when you say, well, we can't provide infinite amounts of outside air because we have energy codes. And so, that's always a little bit of a tension, but I think we're finding our way through that in the buildings I'm working on, and some of the buildings I'm seeing out there being delivered that are trying to transverse both of those things.
If I can add to what Tom said, one of the things that most humans really appreciate is the ability to control the environments they're in.
Yeah.
And so when you are given the ability to say, the environment I want to be in is a lot cooler than everywhere else, then it really helps the employees because they're feeling like they're being taken care of. And that's a very big thing, especially for this new generation of workers that we're getting. They're very, very sensitive about where they are and what the environment is, less accepting of what perhaps I was in terms of when I was working in that role. And now they're much, much more aware of the need to be in an environment that they can control.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a huge issue. We actually piloted a system called Comfy, where we gave every occupant access to change their zone condition.
They can vote, right?
They don't vote. They actually just say I'm hot, and it'll automatically turn the VAV or fan coil, whatever your conditioning unit is, on full blast, so you get an immediate, because everybody wants something now, right? This is the I want it now time, right? That's, you got Amazon Prime, you want it now, you get it in an hour. It's the same thing as, like, most traditional systems will kind of slowly get to temperature, and so most people don't feel it right away. So what they did is they gave this immediate satisfaction. Then over time, they had some machine learning, and then it would kind of identify the time of day that all these calls were coming through to, and then it would identify an average temperature that would hopefully satisfy everybody in that zone. And it was really cool. But it took, there was a lot of people that liked it, and then a lot of people that didn't. And then our engineering staff potentially weren't as savvy, and it identified all these failed mechanical issues, like failed VAV dampers and fan motors and all these other things. And they tried to argue that it was the system that was causing this. And it was like, well, those systems are 17 years old now. And anyway, long story short, people started to like it. The engineering staff was not happy with it. We ended up taking it out. And then after some of those occupants that argued, oh, I don't really like it, once we took it out, they're like, oh, where'd that thing go? I don't have it now. So, I mean, change management is a huge piece of this, because people don't know what they don't know. And even when they do know, sometimes it takes a lot of influence to get them to buy into it.
Yeah, the training of the facility staff, if you're bringing them something new, is a big one. One of the things that seems inherent in all of this discussion is we're probably adding some complexity to everyone's life, right? Yeah. And certainly to those folks who have new systems they have to deal with, that they didn't have before. And, the whole KISS theory of life, you're working against that, and you've got people that, may learn something and then they retire, and then you got the next group in, and, there's all kinds of challenges there. And I remember, speaking of occupants, back, 15, 20 years ago, there was a fairly significant movement towards using natural ventilation or passive cooling in office buildings and lots of buildings without using air conditioning at all. And it was an interesting for me, because I found myself having to train people and telling people when you should open a window and when you should close a window.
Oh my gosh.
And that was the whole thing, whereas if at home they would know what to do. So, that's no technology, or almost low technology. So when you start to add these things, I could see in my mind as an issue is just people that have been down the road before with, adding complex systems into buildings and having to make sure they operate, continue to work, and provide value relative to just more service calls they have to do, or whatever that happens to be, could be a real issue, Cody.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I would dare to say that when our headquarters was built, 505 is in 99, 2000. I wasn't there yet, but it was very ahead of its time. They had we had Siemens, or BAS was Siemens, is integrated with the access control, which was integrated with the lighting. So when you came into the building, you would badge in and it would turn on your lights and your mechanical zone, so that when you walk in, it was good. It's pretty nifty, right? Way ahead of its time back then.
Mm-hmm.
But once the designers and integrators and implementers left, then you had a whole new engineering staff that came in. You had people move around, a lot of these things that people didn't think about. And then so after about a year, you'd have somebody come in and badge in. They sat on the 11th floor, and all of a sudden it'd turn on everything on the 7th floor. And it just became a huge mess. And then the communication protocols weren't as strong. Anyway, when I got on, we had to actually decouple everything. But it's another example of how important it is to make sure that your engineering staff is brought in early and comes along in the process.
Right.
Otherwise,
so they have some ownership and buy-in to it, as well as understand it. So, yeah, I agree. Hey, I want to ask a question, and then I'm going to move on to the last survey slide. I'm just looking at our time, and this is kind of a long question to ask. So just bear with me. But the idea is that, smart building benefits, we sort of identified that, this enhanced user experience, or maybe, occupant well-being, whatever, these are really, benefits to owners and landlords. And the question is, what can you monetize against that? And so in my mind, and sometimes these are the same stories we make around deep energy retrofits or making other kinds of improvements. It's like, if you have an existing asset, are you doing something to improve your competitive position in a market? And hopefully, attend an assumed increase in tenant attractiveness or retention in that case. Those seem to me to be real things in a market where you're competing. And so I guess I'm curious, this, again, I'm asking the question maybe to Luis or Cody, this idea of enhancing user outcomes in a building through digital technology, is that sort of a first or a second or a third order to consideration right now when bringing a building asset to the market?
I have to say, Tom, in my conversations with the leasing and investment folks, both at Unico and Vulcan, it is still space and location, right?
Yeah.
So it's still, how much am I offering the market? Is there a big tenant out there that needs 100,000 square feet, or 500,000 square feet, or 1 million square feet? And where is it located? Those are the primary ones. After that, is this sort of the traditional things that people do, a very fancy lobby, fitness center, some real tangible things that people can see. And maybe in fourth place is smart buildings. And right now it's simply because there just has not been enough education out there.
Yeah.
But my experience right now, Tom, is that a lot of the education is going on is really to the to our environment, to our group, right? To the practitioners, to the people that are the vendors, the consultants like you, and so forth, right? we need to bring in people like me and Cody much more into this conversation. And you really can't bring them in. You actually have to go out to them. You've got to get to them. And so that's the my advice in that respect. And maybe I'm going off on a tangent here. And Tom, I'm going to target you because quite frankly, to echo what Scott said, building owners and tenants rely on trusted advisors. And from their experience, trusted advisors has to be somebody that understands the industry, understands the technology, and can filter through all the information that is coming at them. And I've been to some of these vendor shows. It's an overwhelming amount of information. And it's for me, it's like, where do I start, right? I mean, how do I start? And I need somebody like a Tom Marseille to say, okay, here are your needs and here are the solutions. And here is solution 1, 2, 3. And so you rate it based on cost and the value that you get. And that's what I think, Mr. Owner or Mr. Tenant, that's what I think you should implement.
So if I give you that, Luis, and I show you that, and that value is not something that's, $1 per square foot on utility costs, how does that displace, or how can we get it to displace the floor to ceiling glass or the other things that are sort of not really explicitly in your pro forma, your development pro forma, but are the things that you sort of said are 1, 2, and 3 ahead of it? How do we displace that?
Again, it's really educating the people because they can see the tangibles. It's easy to see the tangible, right? I mean, traditionally, when you have big tenants coming from California, and California, 50%, 60% glazing is kind of okay. I mean, that's kind of the norm. You come here and it's not. It's more 30%, 40%, right? So it's a tangible that people can appreciate and it's easy for them to see. It's harder with this stuff that we're talking about here.
All right.
One thing I wanted to add in here real quick, if I could, is we're talking about making the invisible visible, right? We're talking about, Tom, you were talking about, well, I can introduce more outdoor air and reduce the CO2, or we can improve the lighting. People can see lighting, right? They may not realize that they feel a little sleepy. So how do we make the things that are hard for them to really detectable? It's through a smart building technology, right? If I could give, again, the technology exists, right? If I could give the occupants, right, the ability to say, whoa, my air quality is turning orange in my office. It's not green anymore. I don't even know what that means, but it means something, right? So now suddenly I can translate what we're doing behind the scenes for energy and energy and occupant experience into something that is tangible to them, right? That they can at least see and experience, because they can't see a lot of the things that we want to do.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It really is, but I think it's the training and awareness and the communication and building it into the culture is even more important than that tangibility. I mean, we rolled out this human-centric lighting platform that, could go from 2,700 Kelvin to 6,500 Kelvin, get to the daylight and explain, why that daylight was better for you during that, during the day period, right? To set your circadian rhythm. People were so used to that 2,700 Kelvin that they were like, oh, this light hurts my eyes. I hate this light. Then you could set human-centric lighting where it would actually follow the day clock. And there was all these, and I go back and say, okay, well, where could we help make it go better? But people are so resistant to change. It's a big focus, I think, in the smart building sector because it does impact the occupant, and that's why our roles exist, right? And that's why buildings exist, is to support these occupants. So it really starts at that tenant level. What is their culture? How do you get them educated? And how do you ease them into all this overwhelming new technology?
Yeah. So I'm looking at the time, and we've actually used our time. Which is good. We could have gone on. There was actually a survey question I didn't get to. But I think what we've come to the conclusion on is There needs to be more education up and down the line. There needs to be a better way to communicate the value, the indirect values that are very real, but are harder to see. And I think that was a good final thought, is if we can start to do that, and we're talking about that to the people that have the money, we're talking about doing that to the brokers, we're talking about doing that to tenants. It feels like that's the real steps we've got to take. And so I have a job to do. I think Scott has a job to do. We all have a job to do here to bring this forward. And so
Yeah.
hopefully people are understanding where we came on this discussion. I really do appreciate the attention all you virtual occupants had. If you want to continue some of this discussion, there is a sponsor breakout rooms that start at 10:30 via the Socio conference room app, I guess we call it. And I guess Long Technologies has one of those breakout rooms. And maybe attendees want to come to that one if they want to continue this discussion with maybe some of our panelists will be there too. So thank you again. I don't know, Scott, if you had anything to say on that beyond.
No, I really appreciate it, Tom. Yeah, it's going to be more than just me on that call or in that little conference room. There's going to be 3 of my colleagues that are actually based up in the Northwest with you guys.
Okay. All right. So we're going to close this now, and thank you guys again. And there's the link if you need it. So thanks, Luis, Cody, and Scott for the conversation. And thanks to the people who helped organize it behind the scenes. So, all right, with that.
Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.